started working together really on the issue of women and leadership. It's 15 years ago now, when we wrote our first book, Womenomics, back in 2008. And we were two mothers with young children at that time who both had fairly hectic careers. And we were just very interested in how women were managing to make it all work. And our first book turned out, we thought we were going to write a book about what was then called work-life balance issues. And it turned out really to be a book about the value of women in the workforce. And we came across a whole load of data that was pretty new at the time about how much women contribute to organizations, how skilled they are, how we actually improve the bottom line of companies that we work in, and that companies that have more women in senior leadership perform better. And so we were very excited about this, and we put it into the context of companies allowing us to have flexible work schedules, which might sound archaic now, but back then was a huge deal.
Absolutely.
That we fought for. And I think that was the beginning of our whole journey on why women have not got as far as we feel women deserve to get, and what are the hurdles that stand in our way.
Yeah, I think we're both naturally curious. We're journalists, so I think we were feeling this ourselves, and then we wanted to explore what was going on for other women, and that took us from kind of the economics of women at work to confidence, and then really this piece about power and our relationship to power, and whether that's really an enormous, we hope, last hurdle for us.
I've been a fan of your work since I stumbled upon the Confidence Code. I work with a lot of women executives. I lead the executive program at UCI for women. And I recommend that book to all my clients. I recommend it to every program, women's leadership program I do. So I was really excited to talk to you both about this new book coming out that you have about power. So why power?
When we explored confidence, that was so fundamental, and understanding some of the differences between men and women, the different ways we operate in the workplace, and how we could tweak that, how we could make it clear to managers what was going on. I mean, that was really essential for us, and actually very personally useful, I think. I learned a lot. I won't say I'm the most confident person still, but at least I can correct my behavior and I understand what's happening. But, along the way, we had seen that women also lead differently. But we also had been told by a couple of really powerful women occasionally that they think many women are averse to power. And that really just stuck with us. Like, what is that about? Why do so many women look at this structure today and say, I don't want any part of it? And I would say the other piece about power is we've become evangelists. I mean, since we wrote our first book, it's just clear we need more women in leadership. We do lead differently. Diverse leadership brings better results, usually saner results. Women are just more collaborative, less hierarchical. I mean, in every measure, we need more of that kind of leadership. And I think we just, as Katty said, got frustrated about what is taking so long.
Power is such a word that's imbued with so many different connotations, right? And you talk about that in the book a little bit as well, because I did read the preview. And what do you think why are we so afraid of the word? And what's your definition of power?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I would say this because Claire and I, all of our research is very based in research and data and science. And it was a study that came out of Harvard Business School a few years ago that showed that women don't want power. I mean, pretty much however you define it, women look at it and say, the cost of getting it is too high, and perhaps just as important, what is out there as power just doesn't look very appealing. I mean, it's a power as we see it today is still a very sort of, I suppose, to put it in gender terms, a very masculine construct with a lot of egos and a lot of jostling and a lot of vying for position. And it is very hierarchical, and traditionally power as a construct has involved a certain amount of dominance. And so that study really intrigued us. And it was that launched our whole quest into women's relationship with power. What is it about women's relationship with power that we find it so unappealing? And we came to the conclusion that really it's not about changing women. Women have all of the skills we need, as Claire was suggesting, to wield power in a way that would benefit the world if there were more of us doing so. Really what we need to do is take a long, hard look at power itself. What power has always been, at the people who have had access to it, how power is used, and how you get power. If we could redefine that, actually it would be better for women. Women would find it more appealing, and it would probably be better for men and organizations and countries more broadly too.
Claire, I'm hanging on to your word, dominance, right? Because I think that's one of the things that we have an aversion to, is when you start talking about dominance. I love that you make a distinction a little bit in the work that you've done in the book. You talk a little bit about the power over and the power to. Can you talk a little bit about what you found about the difference between that whole concept around dominance and women?
There was the study Katty talked about in our aversion, and then there was this idea of we might not even define power in the same way. And when we started to uncover that, we thought, okay, now we're really interested in this, because what we started to uncover as we were literally doing the sort of basic work that we always do. Let's talk to a bunch of academics about what power actually is. And you sort of assume that there's going to be agreement and we're going to get that. What we started to see was that women and even female academics told us this is starting to happen as more women are studying power. The notion of what power is being broadened, and that it's a more masculine definition, or more traditional to think of power over, which is, how do I fit into a hierarchy? There is a certain level of dominance to it. What can I essentially make other people do? Women think about power much more as why, to do what, power to, what am I going to do with this stuff? And what we realized is that fundamental difference in the way we think about it, even if we can't articulate it, right? Women are sitting around saying, I just don't define power. I don't think any of us think about it, but we get into these organizations and there's just a natural clash in terms of the way we want to work, the motivation for working, the motivation for wanting to lead, that doesn't feel right. And I think that not fitting, it just becomes harder and harder as women move up, right? And the sacrifice becomes bigger and it just doesn't feel comfortable. And I think it's obvious that adding the sort of why or what for or power to is kind of a healthier notion in general, right? For almost every organization.
If you ask women what they can do with power, if you ask women to imagine how they could change their organization, how they could improve the lives of other people, or improve the lives of the people in their team, or the lives of the people in their country, if you want to go for women political leaders, then suddenly actually power becomes almost a bit more neutral. I mean, it was interesting, you started out by saying power kind of has this slightly negative connotation. Well, actually, if we see power as something like a tool,
right.
And what would you do with power? Imagine for a moment how you could change your company or your team or your country if you had power. Then power becomes more appealing. We're not saying that people who are in the top leadership positions can suddenly, sit back and, work 5 hours a day and put their feet up. No, power comes with responsibility, and leadership comes with responsibility and hard work. But if you focus on the why of power and the outcome of power and the purpose of power and the impact that you can have with power, then suddenly the sacrifices that it might take to get there, which are very real in terms of your family life and your children and some of the other things you might have as life goals, then I think suddenly power becomes something that is worth fighting for and worth having, because you can see the impact of it. Power for the sake of having a bigger office than the guy next door to you. I mean, honestly, is it worth it? Power to make an impact, to do good, to change the world, to improve the situation of the people around you, that's a different proposition.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sometimes I think we're also in semantics, because I talk to a lot of people who think about empowerment and being empowered and the personal power piece of it, right? And I know you make a little bit of a differentiation about that. Talk a little bit about that. So don't we all have power anyway? I mean, is it status oriented, or do we have to have a position to be powerful?
I mean,
yeah.
The personal power was interesting to us. And in fact, I was talking to an academic just the other day about some different project we're working on. And he said, really the power most people want is the power to just do whatever they want and be left alone. Like that's what everyone's after, which is a slightly different,
right.
The power we're looking at has to do with social relationships, right? And fitting into a hierarchy. It's not that power to step away, which I think has been an alternate path for many women. Like, I don't like that, but if I can do this over here on my own, that's much better, because that doesn't feel great. So and I think that is appealing, and probably post-COVID, that's even more appealing for
so many women are going out and starting their own businesses, right? I mean, we're hearing so much about that. Yeah, exactly.
But I think, the fact is we need women in leadership. It's amazing to have female entrepreneurs, and that's important. But we need women to lead countries, organizations, governments, enterprises, because we do it really well, and we do it with good values. And I think, this formula of, like, we have on the cover, less ego, that's a sort of central premise for us.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you this. I don't know if you know this, but my tagline for Power Presence Academy is less ego, more soul. I don't know if you know that.
Oh,
so it's synchronistic that you mentioned that, right? So right there,
a long time thinking about more joy, less ego. And we had a lot of debates backwards and forwards about joy, because we didn't want it to sound like joy, candlelight and, sunset joy. This is actually more soul is maybe part of it, because this is joy that comes from values and community and connection. A real profound, but because some of the women leaders we spoke to actually, as you just kind of suggested, didn't love the word power. They preferred the word leadership. But there is a real joy in power implemented well. We found from the women who have power, who use it in a way we find is effective and impactful, there's a real joy in the job in the work they do.
Yeah. So tell me if I'm hearing this correctly, if I'm interpreting this correctly. What I'm hearing from you, and also from the book, is that we exist in systems currently, and and so choosing to leave the systems and go out on our own isn't really behooving women, whereas being part of the power structures and then redefining them is where you're going, at least that's what I'm interpreting. Am I interpreting that correctly, or am I making a leap there?
So just that we struggled with that at the end, because we talked to a number of female leaders who have said, like, this whole system is so rotten, maybe we should walk away from it. And I think Katty and I don't think we can afford to walk away from it. I think there are too many women actually heavily invested in it, and at levels that need support. There's something that's really effective in recognizing, at least, this system isn't working well. And so what we're hoping is, by calling it out and helping everybody understand the problems with it, it makes it easier to want to be part of reforming it.
Yeah.
And we're not, Pollyanna about this. We spoke to enough women leaders who said to us, look, a utopia out there with no power structure does not exist, and actually wouldn't function well. I think the way to think about it is to think you can have power structures, but they can be power structures that are working to improve the status of everybody, that are keeping connection with people at the bottom of the power structures, where genuine empathy for those who are still coming up is valued, where you're still able to see where your organization can make improvements. And I think that's really what we're talking about. And I think the reality is we have to work within the existing power structures, because the women who get to the top of the existing power structures have the ability to make the most change. It's very hard when you're in your early 20s. And we give tips throughout the book on how you can can improve not only your relationship with power and your own access to power, but also change power once you have it. But the people who are really going to make a difference are the women who are at the top.
Yes. And it's interesting, Katty, because I think that's almost like a double-edged sword that we're dealing with, because there's so much research about this. I guess it's called the queen bee phenomenon, where, you know, women get to a certain level, right? And then they start emulating the men that are at the top there, rather than trying to help the other women or trying to change style, and then start to frown upon a different sort of style. And so that's an interesting dynamic where it's like, okay, I'm one of the men, or I'm one of the guys here. And so I don't want to show my softer side or show more empathy, because then I won't be accepted. I worked so hard to get here. So that's an interesting thing. And I see it in some of the women that I work with as well, who are trying to change that. It's like, okay, I'm going to be this way, and I'm going to model the way. And that is what I think I'm hearing you're encouraging people to do. So I would ask you, from the research, what do you think what advice would you give women leaders?
I think that women who aren't leading in a way we would expect just surprise us, and they really stand out. And I would say there are probably some women who do have to, there are some structures that are even, you know, that are just so hard to change, some kinds of bureaucracies, an investment bank, or right, some of those places are going to be pretty tough. A lot of the women we talk to who have reached the top and were sort of our exemplars in the book are you know, they're really running things differently and not afraid to do it. And so I think there's enormous possibility. And I think the advice I would also say right now for women is, and we write about this in the book, is this is a moment for change. I mean, there is change coming underneath for post-COVID in terms of what the values are, the way people work, what men want to, what men don't want, what the younger generation, you know, this is a moment when you can make a lot of change, right? There's an appetite for it. The entire workplace is shifting. And so I think we get quite specific in a couple of our chapters about some of these sort of hurdles that still hold women back at the upper levels, you know, just ridiculous things about, you know, that have to do with the checklist, what somehow women never really checking everything off the check, you know, just things that are so clearly biased, but are still with us, and companies who've managed to get around them. So you know, that's, I think useful for female leaders, but I think largely just, I hope they'll be inspired by what we've seen out there as possibilities for incorporating a different way of using power.
There are now over a dozen global studies, the International Monetary Fund, Goldman Sachs, Columbia Business School, Pepperdine, I mean, you name it, the European Union have all done studies showing that organizations that have more women in senior leadership outperform their competitors by every measure of profitability. Well, at some point you have to think, well, there's a reason for that. Now, there is cause and effect going on here. And so for women to think, I think that's very empowering, helpful for women, because it makes you think, well, if there is something inherently about the way we lead that is different and valuable, let's hang on to those differences. I mean, to go into leadership and then emulate the guys, what's the diversity? I remember one time Claire and I went and spoke to an investment bank, and they told us they wanted to improve, you know, their numbers when it came to female talent. And after a bit, one of the male partners, we'd been speaking to them for about an hour and a half, said, well, the thing is, how could we go into universities and just find young female students who are going to have exactly the same values and work ethic and ideals that we have always had here at this bank? And Claire and I looked at each other and we thought, these people don't want diversity. I mean, they wanted alpha men with skirts on.
Whoa,
I mean,
right,
they wanted to clone men. And that's not what diverse leadership, that's not what brings you the value of diverse leadership. I mean, it just doesn't. Numerically, it doesn't. The numbers show that all the studies have been done, the algorithms have been done. So if for no other reason, I mean, just have the confidence of thinking this is a bottom line issue. The way, when we can lead differently, it adds to the bottom line. It improves performance.
Yeah.
So we don't need to try and lead like men do.
One thing I want to ask you, and I just like to get your take on this because I think it's interesting. I mean, you look at the media, right? And you look at, and both of you are in the media, right? But you look at some of the movies that are coming out about women superheroes now, right? So even Wonder Woman, and a lot of these archetypes that we see are based on, again, dominance, winning, fighting. We've got to fight to win. I mean, what do you think about, creating new types of archetypes? I mean, how can we change that? Because I mean, I think we are all like, oh, that's great. That's such a kick, excuse my expression, right? But
Right.
it's not. It's just confirming those same stereotypes. It's just making it a female version. It's exactly what you just said, Katty. It's like there's a clone of a superhero, but she, now she has the sword instead of the guy. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
That's just a provocative question.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think we do need new archetypes, and we need to examine that question, because we wrote about this in our newsletter recently, but there's a series I've been watching with my teen daughter called The Power. And it's based on a novel about young teen girls suddenly getting like essentially the ability, the electric power that comes out of their hands. It's like some new organ, it's a kind of slightly dystopian, but exciting world. And it really does turn everything around, right? Because suddenly women really have this strength. And this question is, are they using it better, or are they terrorizing people with it? And there's a lot of both. And I feel like it sort of has sparked a lot of interesting conversations between the two of us, because I see my daughter, she gets so excited at some of this sort of violence. It's just,
but I mean,
yes, he deserved that.
Right. We're talking about redefining power.
Right.
Yet we're
Right.
creating the same images over and over again. And so that's why it's, what happened to the archetypes of Mother Earth or whatever it is, right? A different type of archetype. And so how do we also take responsibility for that? And that's a bigger issue.
Well, Katty, doesn't this gets into a chapter we had about men in our book, which is that in reality, men are the ones losing out when they don't have that part of their life, right? Their values, and this goes back to that original study, their values, in the way they rank things in their life aren't as broad, right? So this sort of time for nurturing or community building or taking care of, that's not up there, right? They're sort of expected to be in a narrower lane and value success at work. But until those, young boys are seeing the joys of that and understand nurturing, literally, whether it's community, kids, whatever it is, as part of a value, it's probably hard to translate that to the big screen as effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, it's out there.
Yeah, I just thought I would bring that up because it's masculine, feminine.
Right. Yeah, it's a great thought. I mean, you're right. It's like we've jumped into something that seems so appealing, but actually all we're doing is perpetuating the same stereotype.
Right. So, all right. So as closing, as we end this, because I'm really excited, and I don't quote promote books on this podcast, but this one I'm promoting because I really do. Like I said, I always include the confidence code on all the book lists that I offer and to my clients. And I just finished a cohort program a few weeks ago, and I mentioned this book already. So I'm really excited about it. So talk to us a little bit about what you think the value is in reading the book, and what other words of wisdom you would offer the audience who is listening today. Now, there are men and women that listen to this podcast, but what are some last words of wisdom you would offer?
I think it's really about seeing, this sounds terribly grandiose, but it's about seeing the world differently. It's a book that allows you to think there can be a different way, and which takes a lot of science and data and leadership stories, makes that accessible in a way that not just changes the outside world, but changes your world too, because we root all of this in advice for women every day. How can you change the way that you work? How can you, if you are in leadership position, how can you make your organization a better place for all of those people coming up? If you're not in a leadership position, how can you recognize that actually the way you do things is good? I mean, women have an awful lot that is a leadership skill. We have one woman leader in the book who says she looked at her daughter-in-law juggling a toddler and a baby and suddenly realized, wow, those are leadership qualities. It's crisis management, it's nurturing, it's communication, it's budgeting. If you took all of those skills that you have, if you are the mother of small children, for example, and you take all of the skills that you use every single day in that role, and you took out the word mothering and baby and you translated just those skills into the business world, you would have an ideal corporate leader right there. So little things like that. I think we hope that this book will allow women to see everything that they bring to the table already and realize they don't have to actually change themselves, but there are things they can do to tweak their environment to make their skills more appreciated and better paid and more valued.
And I hope it will, as Katty said, make more women think, power doesn't look so bad anymore. We can see that it sort of rebrands power a little bit to get rid of that negative stereotype. And for men, that power can be broadened. I mean, I'm not so sure men love power as an ego game either, right? So I think, again, like Katty said, once you see it, I think we put this in the book, once you see something a certain way, it's hard to unsee it. And that's what we're hoping, that it will kind of show this other possibility in the shadows and we can will it into reality.
That's terrific. You know, Katty, you said at the beginning of what you just said, you said, this sounds grandiose. I don't think it sounds grandiose at all. I think it sounds very much needed. And it's something that I think we all can use a dose of, really starting to think about things a little bit differently. So thank you so much for taking your time today and being with us and sharing some of your insights about this.
Janet, thank you.
Thank you.